Something I find really fascinating in astrology is the whole philosophy ontology underlying everything. For instance, how does a planet convey an archetypal energy into our lives? What is the mechanism for that? And even when I was studying physics, this is something that I was always very critical and skeptical about, even within science. So when I learned about gravity, I was like, well, where does that come from? I don't really buy that a rock is pulling me in. What's the force? What's the mechanism? It's been a while since I was studying physics in college, but it still seems like no matter how deep you go with something, now of course we'll say that there's these force carriers, and that's the mechanism behind it, the way that it is manifested into the world. But you could say, then how do the force carriers carry force? What is the mechanism for that? No matter how deep you go, you can always say, but how? I won't claim to know how these things work, only that we can observe that they do, which of course is the same way that science works ultimately. We're just observing the world, making hypotheses, testing them out, and noticing if they work. And this is the same process that astrologers have been partaking in for thousands of years. Humanity's oldest science experiment. But anyway, the way that ancient astrologers conceptualized the world, the sky, astrology, like I talked about in a different video that you can check out, is that it was like its own world. So the sky is broken up into these different kingdoms that are the zodiac signs. The planets are these wandering characters. Wandering stars is the literal translation of the Greek word. And they have these different relationships that are the aspects, whether these characters are getting along well, or maybe they might be fighting, whether they find themselves in a place that they particularly enjoy or is supportive to them, or maybe they find themselves somewhere that's particularly challenging. So there's a whole story, a whole narrative that unfolds around all of this in the mythology of astrology. But the way that ancient astrologers talked about the planets, they were each representative of a god. So we have Saturn as Kronos, for instance, symbolizing time, amongst other things. But they didn't see the planets as the gods. It's not that the planet Saturn wandering around in the sky is literally the god Kronos. The way they would refer to the planets is as Kronos's star, as if the god were bestowing his energy into that planet. Not that it was literally that. And there were many different theories, of course, for how the archetypal energy of the planet could be disseminated into our lives here on Earth and affecting us. For instance, they would talk about the planets as having either drying or cooling, heating or moistening effects, similar to the way the sun, for instance, is drying. And there are these different qualities that the planets can convey to us, which I think is just fascinating. And these different qualities that the planets are bestowing down upon us through the celestial spheres through which they emanate will determine the subjective qualities that we experience that they are bestowing upon us. I like to imagine it in terms of something that I can already understand, which is the way that we can experience the sun's cycle, for instance. You would not argue that the sun does not have an effect on our lives. And it wouldn't make sense to say that it's literally just going above the horizon and below the horizon. It's not only that we are experiencing light and darkness depending on where the sun is relative to us, but also we are experiencing subjective qualities. The way that you feel at night is different from the way that you feel during the day. I would be hard pressed to think of anyone who feels the same way they do at noon as they do at midnight. Of course, this has to do with your energy levels and circadian rhythms and all of that, and we are quite connected to the sun. But why wouldn't it stand to reason that that's not the only body in the universe that affects us? And just because it may be more subtle or require more perception or deeper study, closer observation, doesn't mean that it's not a real measurable effect. It's so interesting the way that physics understands time and space to be the same. And I remember when I was studying physics, I was good friends with an English major, and I was studying quantum mechanics and astrophysics and just completely overwhelmed and inspired by all of the majesty of the universe and what's possible for us to understand, and the poetry that was lain in all of it. And I was waxing poetically about this to my friend, and she said to me, "But Alina, what about these feelings I have?" And my mind exploded. I was like, whoa, there's actually no way that I have to incorporate your feelings into this framework. There's no space for feelings here. It's just not a part of it. But obviously, feelings are a part of the universe because we are a part of the universe and we have feelings. Which isn't to say that physics should necessarily be in the science of feelings. You know, we've separated that to the realm of psychology, but it makes sense to me, if space and time can be the same, that there can also be a subjective felt quality of time. The time may not just be quantitative, a point that you can measure in some mathematical exactitude, but also a subjective quality. There might be a feeling associated with time. And not just a feeling as an emotion, but again, an archetypal quality. And the system of astrology just has such a fascinating and coherent and complex understanding of what these most fundamental qualities are and the way that they can infinitely intersect with and complexify with each other. That there can be these interactions between what are these most fundamental, foundational, intrinsic, baseline qualities that you can then break down further and further. So there's masculine and feminine, and there's fire and air and water and earth. And you can combine all of these different things, cardinal, fixed, mutable, and when you take all of the different permutation of these things, you get these 12 signs. And even amongst these 12 signs, you can have different combinations and permutations of all of the planets and their archetypal energies. And then not only can the planets be any of these things with their own energies and with the energy of the placement they're in, but they can also have these relationships. And not only that, but this point in time is connected to every other point in time in the future. And every point now and every origin story of what is here will have an effect on something over here. And there's the intersection of these different charts, the way that we interplay with each other, the way that we interact with the country we live in, the business we're a part of, all of it. Infinitely complex, and somehow, over the course of thousands of years of development, quite coherent, quite complete. In many lifetimes, you could never understand it all. Maybe that'll change with AI. Very interested to see how, once we really get some solid AI-specific robots, how that might amplify and accelerate our ability to understand what seems infinitely and impossibly complex. Right now, as far as I've seen, there's not really a very good AI astrology. I'll often ask AI chatbots about when certain placements will happen, certain aspects, certain sign changes in different planets or what have you, and it will often get it wrong. It doesn't seem to understand what an ephemeris is, and it's, I don't know, maybe I just haven't had the right astrology specific ones, but even ones that I've tried like that still haven't been very good. But I'm sure they will be eventually. I don't think that will negate the need for astrologers, because what astrology is also the relationship between the astrologer and the person they're talking to, their client. And there's something meaningful that is the relationship between two humans. Of course, there's a lot that you'll be able to do human to robot, as there already is. You can learn so much, but we'll always need each other. These are tools, not replacements for beings, in my opinion. Maybe they'll become beings eventually. I don't know. Even so, I believe we'll still need humans. Astrologers, doctors, therapists. We still need each other. And need not in this is the bare minimum to survive, but need in the sense of there will be no will to survive without this. But this is a long tangent now. But time is fascinating, and I believe that it has a quality. The fundamental assumption of astrology is that the moment that something comes into the world has something to say about the nature of that thing and its future and development. That we are somehow imprinted with the quality of time the moment that we come into the world. And not only us, but anything. Anything that comes into existence will have that moment, the quality of time from that moment imprinted onto them for the duration of its lifetime. What an interesting idea. I didn't believe it. I was very skeptical. I was a very skeptical person. Discerning, scientific, critical, analytical, quantitative. But it's interesting how to be a good skeptic, you have to actually investigate the thing that you're skeptical of. You can't just say that something isn't real knowing nothing about it and giving no energy to trying to figure out whether or not there may be some validity to whatever it is. And I have studied science pretty deeply. I have my bachelor's in physics from Yale, and knowing nothing about astrology but the zodiac signs and your sun sign, I wrote it off, which I think is what most people do. It's easy to write something off when you don't know anything about it. But a friend of mine was very interested in astrology and did a really deep dive and talked me into a little chart reading that piqued my interest enough to get curious and start to study just a little bit on my own. Didn't take very long at all before I fell down the rabbit hole completely. The more that I learned, the more that I observed, the more that I studied, the more shaken I became with how it seemed to really work. There's no reason that it should. I can't say for sure why it does. I can only observe and continually test. I love the stars. If you liked this video and would like to be notified when I put out more, please subscribe to my channel. Liking and sharing and subscribing really goes a long way towards helping me to reach more people and grow. Of course, leave a comment if you have any questions or thoughts. I do reply to all the comments. And I offer birth chart consultations and timing consultations as an astrologer if you are interested in having me analyze your specific life story, chart, and chronology. I would love to talk to you. Let me know.